Now, here is a typical example of a framework for this case. This is that same case that I showed the timeline for. How you read this framework is you from right to left. There is a outcome. The outcome here is sustainable growth of a family-owned business. Over a period of time, very often family businesses don't survive also. But here is a family business that survived. So the question is asked, it might be worthwhile writing a story about how this happened, how they managed to sustain their growth. So if you look at this outcome, how you get through to this is sometimes you start only with this outcome. Then the case study writers would go and have an initial interview with this family. That's what they did. This is actually the Upasena group. So from what their discussions, they had an insight that the drivers were long-term management view. They didn't want a business only to survive for that time, for livelihood or anything like that. They had a long-term management view from the beginning, from the founder, that here is a business that will go down their generations. A long-term management view. Also, they had some corporate values, which they used to always talk about how they do business. Even what we spoke about as a work ethic was very clear. And they felt that from time to time, these people were talking about certain values. Then another thing that came up as a driver, which from their insights, now to get these drivers, initially they didn't go to literature. Remember that. They had an initial interview, and they, with their knowledge of entrepreneurship, they could identify that they are talking about certain things. So they had also, in that initial interview, they felt that they were very keen on succession planning. They had a very good idea about how they will plan their successors. Because particularly in a family business, there are two things. One is a family business is like any other business, it's a business. So it has a corporate thing on one side. So any corporate, whether it's family or not, has a need for succession planning. But the fact is, in addition to be a normal business, a family business usually is also inheritance. They hand over to next generation. So it's more complex than a normal corporate entity. So they had a very good idea about among their generation, first generation, second generation, who should do what. So they had a very good story about this, where how they identified the talents of their children and their children's children, and also help them to be educated along that line, so that could be used in their business. So they very strategically planned succession planning. Also, where there are other employees other than the family people, and how well they recruited and trained those employees were also there. So the case study writers identified these drivers when they did their first interview. Now they went, after that, what they did is, they went and referred these areas for research, for their literature. So each of these areas, for example, long-term management view is strategy. So they try to see, okay, what does research say about this? What has been written about this? Corporate values, succession planning, and recruitment. So that helped them to see this whole issue very clearly. So quite different to research, where a framework comes or a model comes after doing literature review. In the case of a case study, you do the reference into literature after you identify drivers, because there is no hypothesis here. This is very clear. Now you need to explain it more, so then you go to literature. So it's a little different from doing a research. In a research, you do literature, then you make a hypothesis and all those things, that it may be this, maybe that. That's what a hypothesis is talking about. There is no maybe here. It's very clear. So in order to write the story, you must understand a little more about that topic. That's why literature is done. Now, in terms of situational moderators, what they have identified here is an internal kind of moderator. So you can get internal moderators and external moderators. Internal moderators are something within the organization itself, and they felt that this is the thing that ultimately supported their efforts to sustain this growth, and that was trust between family and non-family members. Now you get in a family business, typically you get family members and non-family members. Very often there is conflict situations. So they had some practices which actually created trust between these two people, and they sort of the case study writers identified that as a key supportive moderator. Now in this case I must make a comment that they have not identified an external moderator, like for example something like government support or something like that. They have not identified and they have missed it out, but that is okay for their case study. Maybe it was not that significant. So, but normally when we are using moderators, we look for some internal moderator and some external moderator as well. So sometimes, very often, it's better if you can identify another moderator from outside, something outside the organization or something like that. So this is a kind of a, when you write a case framework, it also helps you to narrate later on, because you have some essential areas which will explain the growth of the organization and things like that. So it's a kind of a theoretical description also. You have to review literature. Usually they say about 5 articles. This is only a kind of I would say just only an idea. 5 articles on drivers, moderators and outcomes. The outcome also you should have some knowledge about. So we can't have all that knowledge in our heads, no. So it's there in literature. So you can now it will help you to narrate, because there is more behavioral stuff that you can talk about. So then once you identify this framework, then you go for qualitative data gathering.
Can everyone see the slides, please?
Sorry?
I can't see. Can everyone see the slides? I cannot see the slides here.
Well, the slides you're talking the others. Actually, these slides were uploaded, but we are also showing it, right?
Yeah.
There's a student who is uploading it.
No, I'm just asking for the other LPs whether they can see them.
Okay.
The screen went
Anjana, I think we cannot see the screen, right?
Yeah, we can.
The slide went off.
Okay. What I hear is that there was a student who had uploaded it, who was showing it. Lakjiv. Lakjiv is there, is he? Okay. Now what do you do?
Out and I'm back again, so I'll share. Sorry.
Oh yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right. Yeah. Okay. We are now on how you get the data. Qualitative data gathering. Okay. These are really speaking. You have done this, especially those of you who interviewed these entrepreneurs have done it. But there is a scientific way of doing it. I'm sure you would have done something very close to that. But it's very important for me to tell you how it is really done in a case study. There are so many things that you do. One is that you would sometimes interview, and some of the other important things that you must do also is observation. Sometimes there are situations that the writer, the interviewee, the person you are interviewing is saying things, but there are a lot of things that you must also observe. Sometimes if in a situation, say if you're interviewing a person at his workplace, you might sometimes say, okay, can you show me something? Can you take me to some place and show me how this is happening? Or you're talking about this, can I have a look at it? So the observation is also important sometimes. That is why sometimes we take photographs of situations, we sometimes draw sketches, we make sketches of, say you're talking about a particular process or something like that. Then sometimes you might use a process flow chart. So there are things you have to observe also. So there are various types of observations. We say direct versus indirect sometimes. You see with your own eyes, or sometimes you have all clips of this sometimes on YouTube or something like that, and therefore it's indirect. You don't really do it, but there are other things. Sometimes if you this particular person you interview may be having his own videos, so he might allow you to see them. So those kind of things are very important. So sometimes disguised versus undisguised also. Disguised means you really want to observe something. This can be very surreptitious. You don't sometimes do things like this. You want to see without being observed. But there may be situations when we do real case studies that maybe you go and observe on your by yourself and see what happens. Someone says something, and maybe you want to really see how it happens. So it could be either disguised, undisguised. Sometimes structured versus unstructured. What we mean by structured is you do it on a timeline. You do it every once a week or something like that. You do it in the morning, go and see whether it's in the evening. I'm telling the whole story here, right? Because when you're talking about this topic, you need to give the whole knowledge about this. Some may be relevant, some may be not relevant also. But when we are talking about a particular topic of interviewing, we have to talk about these things. Sometimes human versus robotic, what we mean is you might have cameras fixed in various places and you observe things from a room. So these are ways of observation. Sometimes if you want to really write an investigative kind of case, then you need to carefully sometimes investigate. So very often we do our case studies very peacefully, but there are situations you might actually you might have to really understand how it happens. So you might have to do it very basically like that. So now typically the type of interviewing you do with an entrepreneur is what's known as in real qualitative methodology, we call it in-depth interviews. Normally in-depth, that is person to person. They are normally referred to as in-depth interviews. They are one-on-one interviews, really speaking. Sometimes they are called depth interviews also. So the whole idea is you have to here you have to build rapport with this person, and he must feel he must trust you to tell the entire thing, and also he must trust you to really tell the real thing also. So you have to it's the art of the interviewer to get that. Now one way of doing this, sometimes as you go deeper, these interviewers actually expose their real feelings about something. So that is the real depth we are talking about when you're talking about interview. Otherwise he'll be only relating what he wants to relate. One methodology for that is normally referred to as laddering. Laddering is, now for example, when you interview someone, you have to first start with the known facts, right? What's known, like what's published. Okay, he has done this in the market, everyone knows about that, and it is already published. So you start talking about that. It's easy to build rapport. Build rapport means the one-to-one connection by talking about very regular things. Then you go to the next level to ask, okay, so how did you do it? So now when you go to that level, sometimes he must have used some strategies. So he has to really trust you to come out with these strategies, or he will tell you something else. So what we are interested in is, for management knowledge, we have to really know the insight. So therefore you go to that level. So if you can also build rapport at that level, now you can go to the drivers. He will talk about his feelings, what really made him do that. He will talk about his childhood. He will talk about a lot of things like that, which exposes his real drives. So you can't go to the drives directly. Generally what they say is, when you are interviewing someone, first you have to build rapport. And when you build rapport, you can go into stages. That's generally, those stages are called laddering. And finally, he will really even say things that probably are totally emotional. So sometimes the quality of the interview is how well you can achieve that level as well. So sometimes, now I just put that picture of this Richard Branson being interviewed. Now that there was a particular interview where, you know, he was talking, suddenly he said, people are asking why he was such a, this interviewer was asking why he took so much of risk. Now his latest business is trying to take people to space, no? So why he is like that? Then he went on to say, I'll tell you why. And he said, he went on to tell how his mother treated him. You know, his mother had one day dropped his brother and him when they were 5 years or something like that at a petrol station and told them to walk home 5 miles, to walk home alone. A 5-year-old guy, you don't do that kind of thing. So he himself was saying, if she did it nowadays, she would have been in prison, right, for doing something like that. But he says that ultimately that created some inner drive in him, which actually he can explain it only by behaviors like that, childhood rearing practices and things like that. A lot of entrepreneurs don't come out with things like that unless they are really into that mood of going. So then you get the drives. So for example, this Richard Branson's drives are very clear. Why he takes risk is because he is totally, you know, independence seeking, and he somehow can find a way, a strategy to overcome a very difficult situation. So that kind of thing came. So some of these in-depth interviews are face-to-face interviews. Some are telephone interviews. These are not recommended. Usually today Skype interviews are there, and sometimes Skype interview is a second or third best thing that you can do. Sometimes the person not accessible. Okay, am I taking too much of your time? Okay. Now we have been here, now it's nearly 8 o'clock also. 8:40 here. Right, you go on. Right, now here's another area of interviews to get data is focus groups. Now why do we use focus groups is because usually when you interview, say for example, interview an entrepreneur, some project might have been done with a group of people, and sometimes the entrepreneur say, look, this group of people did this thing. So then you must ask the entrepreneur, can we meet them? So you don't meet them one by one, and you meet them together. So that's a focus group, because they all underwent a situation and they can talk about it. And your role here is you actually have an interview guide. Now also I must tell you, when you're going to interview even an entrepreneur, I think you know that, is that you don't have a questionnaire as such, but you have some points in which you want to discuss, and therefore you get the responses of this person. So sometimes a focus group could be where you get the knowledge of a similar group of people, either people who worked as a team or a set of employees maybe, or sometimes a set of customers who experience a particular behavior, and you get them to sit around in a table, and all what you do is you start a discussion based on some points, and then people start talking about it. When they start talking about it, you record it, and then later on you analyze it. So because at that time you are more interested in collecting data and not really understanding the story, but more on collecting data. So these are actually sometimes used. Sometimes if this is maybe not relevant for case studies like doing blind tests and things like that. If you want to check what is better than the other, a blind test is actually when you give say a product or something without a label, and you compare it with another one, and you ask, okay, what do you think is better, and things like that. There is no indication of what it is, and this is also used sometimes. Why I'm expanding this idea is because some of you may be writing cases which are not entrepreneurial cases. So in that case, you might have to do these blind tests and things like that. Okay. Also, sometimes very what you were doing, like audio and video documentation, something that you did in the leadership study, was very also very good. So this is something that is more like the audio and video documentation. The superiority of a video recording is that you can it's reality, and you can go back and play it again, forward, backwards, and you can say, okay, what did he say? What was his body language, for example? In a video, you can see body language, so you can go back and say, okay, why did he use that body language? And sometimes that's also a very important area for it gives information. Body language gives information. Now I'm using body language. Okay, so why am I using this body language? It's actually that's worthwhile reading. So this is important. Sometimes you might do mini groups, small groups, which means 2 or 3 people. Normally what you do is mini groups is like if you're interviewing directors together, and you're not interviewing them separately, because it may be important to get a collaboration. Say sometimes the story comes better when 2 people talk to each other, and you're interviewing them while you're talking. They say it's not like that, maybe it's like this, and they start discussing. Sometimes this can be very important. Okay, I'm moving forward. Ethnographies, actually if you are using ethnographies, this is more like what we mean is if you are studying a group of people in a particular location, like what I did when I did my MBA, I studied people from down south. So that is very ethnographic studies, because the social behavior is similar sometimes, and you might actually identify certain very important things. So you might observe things, sometimes very unstructured interviews, you might talk with them. Sometimes you might even work with the guys. Say if you are trying to trying to interview say for example a small boutique guy or something like that, you might work one day with him, work a day in that shop. You might dress like the guy or whatever and work one day. Then you get a lot of information. You're not writing anything, but in the evening you sit down and write your observations. So things like that are also very interesting. So that is I'm going a little giving you only some ideas. Sometimes street sessions are more like where you interview people who are already in action. Like I was mentioning that day that some of our students did studies of PETA entrepreneurs. So when they did studies of PETA entrepreneurs, they were on the street, really speaking, sometimes identifying really what they do. While the other guy is working, they were talking with him. And so therefore these kind of sessions are also extremely interesting. So you don't, some of these things have to be done at site. Particularly you get more data, more rich data when you do that. Otherwise, if you interview this street guy, say for example someone who is working, maybe sometimes a small businessman or small entrepreneur, you can't interrupt his work. So you want to also observe. Sometimes you will just sit aside and see what he does. Sometimes in between he will explain. Suddenly a customer will come. So sometimes you will also serve. So these kind of things are very interesting situations, and it has been done many times. These are generally referred to as street sessions. Okay, sometimes we use projective techniques with entrepreneurs. You can try this out, really speaking. If you want to really, the whole idea is we want to get drives, no? These entrepreneurs' drives. So you could give tests like this. This is normally referred to as a thematic apperception test. A picture like this is very ambiguous. And you tell this guy, okay, I bet you know if you give this to an entrepreneur, the guys will jump at it, really speaking. This is our experience. That is part of the entrepreneurial behavior. And you ask a question, okay, tell us a story about this. So he will make a story. The story should be something like, who are these guys? What are they doing? What is going to happen? And I bet you, if you give a picture like this, which has no real meaning, to an entrepreneur and tell them, okay, make a story about this, they will make a story. They generally jump at this idea. This is something special to entrepreneurs. And then you record it. Then you analyze it after, because from that, this story is coming from inside the guy. So some of the drives generally can be identified in the story that they say. So this is actually used by clinical psychologists to identify critical drives in people. So you could also use this. Next time you try to interview an entrepreneur, you just give them a picture like this which does not have any meaning as such, and tell them, okay, tell a story about this. You can just take any picture like this from any magazine which is not clear, where there are no people who are known, and tell a story about what's happening. Who are these guys? And they will tell a long story. You record it. After they record it, you analyze it. And then you sometimes, these are normally called projective techniques. Without the person's knowledge, he's projecting his personality out. So this can be very useful. It's very interesting actually sometimes to use these things. So these are some projective techniques that you might use to really identify people's inner drives. Methods of recording. Methods of recording are actually various ways of doing that, which you are familiar with. You can do real-time notes. That is the oldest method. While a person is talking, you just take down notes. But the problem in that is that it's very difficult to do that while listening, and also sometimes you might miss a particular statement, so you can't tell the guy, okay, you break his whole trend of talking. Now notes on memory, that is also being done. That might be good, but usually if you are trying to do notes based on memory, it's better to have two people, because then sometimes you can't record, you can't do anything, and particularly depending on the situation, it's best for you. So, say for example, if you're participating, you're serving in a canteen of an entrepreneur. That also has been done by some of our guys. So then you can't be writing notes and serving. So in the evening, when everything is over, you sit down and by memory you write, okay, what are the key behaviors, what are your experiences and things like that. Then and there. So you don't go the next day, because the next day the whole memory gets wiped out. Voice recorder was the oldest method, technical method. Video camera, of course, is what people use mostly now. And other things written by respondents Yes, sometimes that is possible if you can't access the person and you get a person to write something about something, but that's not preferable. Archives. What we mean by archives is old records. Now, when I did my study about low country entrepreneurs, these are 100-year-old companies, so you can't, all those people are no more. So you have to then go to the archives and then stay there and try to get records. Or I spent a lot of time actually in the archive department with reading newspapers of 1900 and things like that. So all those newspapers are there in our archives. So you can see some pictures also of people who are there a long time ago. Now sometimes you have to go into situations like that also. These are methods of data recording. Okay, now analysis. Very basically, remember, an interview is qualitative data. Qualitative data, it's not quantitative. It's people's ideas and what they're saying and their narration. So that's generally referred to as qualitative data. There are ways of analyzing basically, and this this flow chart is showing really how you make meaning out of what these guys say. So first itself, what you do is you collect data by interviewing, and then you code it. Now what we mean by coding is you have to transcribe, you have to, once you have recorded, you pick out some key phrases that this person is saying and you list them, some key statements that they're talking about, and you try to understand each sentence and say, what does this sentence mean? Is it something to do with from your knowledge of entrepreneurship, you should be able to pick what this means. If someone says, okay, when I'm driving in the car, I don't miss seeing things on the road, then this guy has a very good observation ability, observing, he sees opportunities. So then immediately you will highlight that particular sentence, and on the right side you will give it a name and you say opportunity seeking, something like that. You give it a meaning of that particular sentence. So generally you can't do that alone, it's very difficult. One or two people should help you to do that, to decide on what this really means, and that is called coding. That's called coding. Every sentence that this person says may have a meaning, may not have a meaning. If it does not have a meaning, just pass it and then go. Very often about at least 20 to 30% of those statements they say can be coded to mean something. So there are so many behaviors in entrepreneurship, no? Like persistence, persevering, need for achievement, ethical orientation. So each of these sentences people say could be able to be coded. So then once you do that, the coding, you will find that very often some codes keep repeating. So now if they repeat, then you have categories, and those categories also, it belongs to a cluster, maybe an achievement cluster or a power cluster. So you can cluster them under, so those will give you the idea of the drives, of these drives. So this is data analysis, right? Then you actually keep checking out, and finally you have a good idea about the theory, this guy's theory, what is the model that explains this person. These are his drives, these are his preferred environments, under what conditions does he react better. So then the moderators and the drivers become very clear. So this kind of analysis is ideal to identify the framework. Now you can see this, a lot of stuff, but the thing is, this is the way to do a case study really, by analyzing mere data, because when you interview an entrepreneur, that is data. You have to now turn it into information. So the way of turning it to information is to analyze it like this. So typically, when you analyze this particular next slide, shows a typical handwritten kind of analysis of what it looks like. Typically, the notes of a analyst. So on what you get on the left, left is really certain phrases. These like the interview phrases from the interview, and you have highlighted certain things, and on the right side you have a margin, and you say that it is that. That's called coding. Those are observations, comments, codes. At the bottom, you have also a little small space there, and that space is where you develop your model. Based on that, you can see things are emerging, and then you have a very good idea of the framework, because the framework is not arbitrary. It's really coming from what he really said. Okay. Okay, now last slide is actually our own how we write our own case study proposal, because if I think some of you will be writing case studies, so when you write the case study proposal, I think you will be given more information about this shortly, but basically from my side of it, because I have been managing these case studies, we have guidelines. So I hope you get this PIM presentation guidelines book, the latest one. And the latest one actually, your typical, when you're making, before getting the permission to write a case study from PIM or the approval, you have to present a proposal. So what you have to write in the proposal, about 15 pages or so, is under these titles. So you have the first one is the case background. Really, why are you writing? Why is this case interesting? Why are you thinking of writing this case? The backdrop. That's the backdrop. What is so special? What is the major outcome here that you want to do? Is there a theme? Under what theme are you thinking of writing? What are your objectives? Why are you writing this case? And the scope. The scope is you're not going to write about some things. You're going to write, now if you write, I was mentioning, like for example, the golden key thing has so much of scope. From different points of view, people will see different things. But your scope is you are saying, okay, I am limiting it to this. I'm not going to write about all these things. I'm only going to write about how they manage the recovery. So that kind of thing. So that also has a connection with your theme. Then once you do that, you know what your, because if you have identified the theme, you also have an idea of what kind of literature to read. So you will say very briefly under the next heading, theoretical description, you will pick at least 5 articles on this thing. Either you can download it from the web, or generally you have to refer to some articles that were written on this particular theme area, and you will read a little bit of that and review this literature. You can say this author says like that, this author says like that, this is what it means. If you're talking about a particular driver, you write about the driver. So you don't write very much of this in this proposal, but you give an idea about okay, these are the kind of literature I'm thinking of reading. You don't do the whole literature review, but you give some idea. Then your case framework, how in terms of drivers, outcomes, context moderators, those you draw a model. So that at that stage, of course, when you make your proposal, we make comments. We'll tell why don't you do this, why don't you do that, and give you some feedback as well. So you will be generally looked after on that. Basically, you won't do this totally alone like that. Once you write your proposal, we will review it, and we will tell you what to update, what to do, and things like that, and eventually we will approve it. Methodologies is how you're going to collect data, how you're thinking of collecting data, how are you thinking of analyzing this data, and what is your timeline. So you have to select the timeline through which something particularly happens. So don't write the entire history of a particular situation. If you want to write a little bit of history, you put it in the background. But the timeline is when this action happened, and you are describing because of these behaviors this happened. Then you narrate the case. That is the storytelling. How are you going to, now you are still not done this. This is only a proposal still. So what you're going to write is how you plan to narrate. What are you thinking of doing? How are you thinking of indicating behaviors and things like that? And finally, discussion of findings. You are not done the case study still, so you have to only say how you're planning to do it. That's about all. And a conclusion. So at this stage, of course, is very clear. It's only a proposal, but you must be very clear of what you're going to write. That's all, and what the theme is and under what conditions you're writing that. So I think you will get more information about this, how to proceed with these proposals. But from my end, this is something I thought of including also, because our experience is most of the people wrote entrepreneurial case studies. So it is very easy to talk about this in a course of entrepreneurship. This is the proposal. So that's about all, basically. So are there any questions that you want to ask? Any questions?
For the proposal, it should be.
Sorry?
For the proposal, how many pages we have to write about?
15 to 20 pages.
15
Very
to 20
clear.
pages.
15 to 20. I think it's like an assignment. It should be very clear. It need not be very bulky. Normally, it's 15 to 20 pages. Very clear idea of what you want to write on.
Okay.
All those. Yeah. Anything more? Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yeah, very similar. All what you are trying to do is, you must know what the outcome you are talking about. Say, for example, if you are talking about a company that has increased its market share very rapidly, it's in a competitive environment, okay, their market share was 20%, and within 2 years it became something like 35%. That is significant enough. So you are asking a question. This might be a very strategic case sometimes. You want to write a case of how they did it. So that has nothing to do with entrepreneurship, but it might be having something to do with strategy or leadership, for example. No, even strategy, I think one of the key drivers might be leadership. But you follow the same method. Very clearly what you do is first identify what is this outcome you are talking about. Once you identify the outcome, then you go backwards and say, okay, who are these people who did this? Now, if it's an entrepreneur, then of course it's very clear. But you need to go and meet these people before writing the case to get a preliminary idea, or sometimes if there is published information and it's sufficient to identify roughly how this happened, then you can say, okay, I'm writing on the theme of marketing strategy. So it's very clear, you're not going to write about anything else. You're not talking about HR strategy or anything like that. And you write, then you refer the literature on marketing strategy and see whether there is anything that helps you to understand this case. Similar, very similar. We are not talking about a person here, but you're talking about a group of people, an organization that did something exceptionally well. So, very similar. Yeah. But I think there is one condition. You might have to get the permission of if you're talking about a company, or an entrepreneur for that matter, you have to get their permission to write the case. That is a condition here because that will lead to some problems also otherwise. Is that clear? Yeah. Anything else? It's okay now. You can always email me. Anytime you can always email me and ask me anything that you want. Yeah. Gregory, you want to ask something?
Mute Gregory.
Gregory? Do you want to ask something?
Gregory, you are on mute. We can't hear.
Okay. Yeah. Lakjiva?
I'm good. No questions. Thanks.
Okay. Kirti and Anjana?
Right now, Doctor.
Yeah, I think yours is. Okay. Okay. Nazir?
So good, nothing for the moment.
Okay. Shama?
Okay, doctor, thank you so much.
I think you all do it quite well. But you can always phone me or anytime, right? We can, if you want more information, you can either email me or you have my email address, or you can catch me at a time I'm free and talk. It's okay. So send. We are there to support. So you can always count on us, right?
Sir, where is the deadline for this?
Thank you, sir.
Okay. You're welcome. See you then.
Yeah, thank you. Good night. Good night.
Good night. Good night.
Thank
Good
you,
night. Good night.
Deadline for the proposal?
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.